Rock and Jouv. Rock and Jouv. Rock and Jouv. Rock and Jouv. Rock and Jouv.
Rock and Jouv show's back for another week.
Welcome back to Rock and Jouv Show. Hopefully you found their first episode pretty enticing. We're gonna drop another one on you real quick. How about that? Al, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a pretty good day so far.
Yeah.
Knock on wood.
Okay.
I hope this show goes pretty smoothly.
Well, I'm sure it will.
As I would say,
Pretty
the
smooth.
last one, a lot better than I expected.
Yeah. Well, I think we got some naturals here. I think that's what it is. So last episode we had promised the ranking of the Jordan and LeBron team that they played against. It's part of the debate, but we decided to go ahead and rank these teams without any hidden agenda, simply rating in facts and numbers and in science the best teams that these two basketball players played against to win their combined 10 titles. Would you agree that is the case?
Absolutely.
No emotion here, just facts.
Nope, there's no emotion. There's just facts. You see off the air, Ashton and I do call each other and we talk about basketball, and we were kind of talking about how there's always, no matter what happens, like it's always the GOAT debate, and it's honestly, it's such a, I mean, it's if there's a topic in front of you, like you have to debate it. You know what I mean? I mean, we've talked about it on the show plenty, I'm sure, but generally speaking, it's just always so toxic. It's both sides. It's all emotion. It's like the episode of Always Sunny where they're like, all right, we're not gonna use any emotion today, and then 2 seconds later, Mac is like, I'm going to poke your eyes out. I'm going to poke your eyes out. That's essentially what the LeBron Jordan debate becomes on both sides. So today we're doing a nice fresh take. I haven't really seen anybody do this, and I think especially after LeBron won his fourth, so now it's a nice round 10. I haven't seen anybody do it, so we're gonna do it today.
I'll say my 10, you can say your 10, and then we'll kind of each go into it a little bit. All right, so my number 10 was the 1990-91 Los Angeles Lakers.
Wow.
I believe that's Michael Jordan's first title.
Wow,
That's
was
the weakest team.
That's kind of wild.
Who was yours?
I'm just gonna say I do not have the Lakers nearly that low.
Okay.
I have the 2020 Heat.
Okay, yeah, I was afraid of that. If you don't mind, can I explain myself?
Go ahead.
For the Lakers. Okay. By this time, the only people on this roster that were even worth mentioning in a conversation about basketball, you got James Worthy, you got Magic Johnson, Sam Perkins, Byron Scott. Okay, you also have your AC Green, your Vlade Divac, whatever. You have 6 strong people. Michael Thompson actually played Thompson's dad. There's only 5 people averaging double digits on this team. Okay, we go over to the playoffs. Okay, you still have an old man Magic Johnson, and may I remind you, this is his last year in the league. Okay, Stu was probably playing with 8. I hate to say it, but he probably was. Okay, the second highest scorer on this team was James Worthy, and of course, fellas love James Worthy, right? And I'm not here to knock on him. Okay, big game James, but at the same time, it's not doing it for me. He's playing 40 minutes a game. He has 21 points. I get that, but is that your second best player? And is Sam Perkins your third best player? Okay, let's not forget who the Bulls have at this point. You still have Horace Grant. You still have Scottie Pippen. I mean, this is kind of a piece of cake. You have shortened Magic Johnson. You have basically a worthless bench. I mean, I don't even think it's a contest. I think these guys got shredded in the playoffs, and they did. They were gentlemen swept 1-4, and the Bulls just basically overpowered them. I mean, this is not a great team by any means. And as I started going through this list, I'm kind of like, man, it was just kind of like a beatdown of poor old man Magic Johnson. And then he retired, well, he left the league because obviously he was sick, but he didn't come back for another 5 years. This was such a bad beatdown. I don't know, man. This is definitely the worst team in my life.
You see, that's interesting. I'm just going to say I actually don't even have that Lakers team in the bottom 5.
Okay. Well, I'm very interested to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, neither of us were alive to know how that team really was that year. I mean, they won, 58 games. That's pretty good, but like looking at their playoff run, they swept the first round. They gentlemen swept the Warriors, and then they beat the Portland Trail Blazers in 6, who made the finals the year after, and then they got trounced by the Bulls, right? So you're like, all right, that's like, it's like you could look at that in revisionist history. So, like, we don't need any revisionist history, anything like that. Like, we just watched what happened in the bubble. We just watched this whole regular season. And I think none of us had the Heat making the finals. I don't think any of us had the Heat even making the conference finals. I think this was a team that overachieved. I think Jimmy Butler definitely established himself. I think he's got to be considered like a superstar type player now. If not, he's got to be just on the cusp. I mean, I think he's like a top 10 player in the league. I don't think that's deniable. I mean, but you look at the rest of the roster. I mean, there's like Bam Adebayo, who's an interesting player, was a first-time All-Star this year, but like that was the number 2 option. Like the Lakers team, their number 2 option was James Worthy, who was in the Hall of Fame, right? And then they had like Tyler Hero, like really nice rookie, like good shooter, but I mean besides that, he's not a complete player. Duncan Robinson, essentially like the same thing. And then there was Dragic, who's like a little past his prime, but like still pretty solid. Olynyk, and I mean Kendrick Nunn. Like, they had guys, right? This was a good team, like a solid team, but not a team that anybody thought even belonged in the NBA Finals. And I mean, really, they did their job. I'm not trying to knock them. They beat the Bucks, who were the clear favorites in the East, and then they beat the Celtics, who, I mean, I with all due respect, the Celtics were probably favored in that series. I mean, they were the higher seed. I'm not trying to take anything. Obviously, like we did this no emotion at all. If we're looking at this historically, if we're looking like at the other teams, like the Blazers had, the Lakers had 2 Hall of Famers. The Blazers had, 1 Hall of Famer. The Sonics had 2. I think Kemp is in the Hall of Fame. If he's not, that's a travesty. I mean, I think Jimmy Butler eventually is going to be in the Hall of Fame, but I feel like when we look back, I think in revisionist history, especially when they look at this roster, I mean, unless Tyler Hero becomes the next Devin Booker or something, which he very well could, I think people are going to be like, how the hell? Again, not taking anything against them, but I just think as an overall roster, I didn't think that they were going to have enough firepower to beat the Bucks. I didn't think that they were going to have enough firepower to beat the Lakers. I just that was my thing with them. I just always thought they didn't have enough firepower, which ultimately they didn't. But Jimmy Butler really, he played his ass off the entire playoff.
Absolutely. That we can agree on. All right, so number 9 did not have the Heat. I had 92-93 Phoenix Suns.
Jesus.
So to finish out Michael's first three-peat. And this came down to something pretty simple for me. It was the bench input of these games. Basically, nobody, the sixth man, the most that anybody averaged off the bench was 8 points, and that was Danny Ainge pouring in 24 minutes. I mean, I get it. You shorten your playoff rotation, sure. But other than that, I mean, you only really have 7 points off the bench, 6 points off the bench. Really nothing coming from these players off the bench. And then your best player is Charles Barkley, who's averaging 26 points a game in the playoff, 13 boards. And that's great. But he's not guarding Jordan. Who is guarding Jordan?
I mean, Dan Marley was guarding Jordan. I don't think he ever won any defensive player of the years. I'm pretty sure he was on all defense a couple of times. I could pull up his it was 2-time all defense,
very well
3-time all star.
But I'll tell you what, that didn't stop Jordan from having 30.
No,
and
no,
also whoever was guarding Pippen also did a crappy job because Pippen also had like 26. I'm pretty sure. Just in the finals alone, I mean, these guys really torched them, and I think it's mostly due in part to the fact that they really had no bench input from these guys. I think that if your best player is a power forward, that's fine, and that could have worked back then. But and don't get me wrong, Charles Barkley was super dominant back in these days. But at the end of the day, that's not really doing it for me, and I don't think I think that there are deeper, better teams on this list that don't have Kevin Johnson or Tom Chambers or something. You know what I mean? Players that actually have kind of lasting impact past 1992-93. So that's why I think that this was the 9th best team, 2nd worst team that either guy faced.
See, that's interesting. I'm kind of glad we did this. Most of these 6 of these teams we never got to watch live. I don't know, unless our dads were watching like the 98 finals or 97 finals against the Jazz or something, like when I was like in the hospital after I just got born. I don't know. Maybe that has something to do with it, and it very well could. But I'm looking at these numbers, and that's all I can really go off of. I've seen some of these teams play. We've all seen the Jazz play a game or two, and even we've watched some of those playoff games. So the same thing with the Sonic. But these like lower teams that we really haven't seen, I stand by the Magic Lakers team. I think that was a terrible team.
And I don't think that this 92-93 team was much better. I think this is kind of when you start hearing the argument. Michael was just playing against Dennis, in accountants, and I think that
Dennis
this is certain.
I think the funniest thing about that is like when we watched The Last Dance, all these teams every single year they thought, oh, this is gonna be our year. Like this Suns team went in. Charles Barkley won MVP. Like whatever. Like this is the year the Bulls are gonna get upset. Especially the Jazz and like the Sonics were the up and coming like incredibly athletic team with the Blazers. Like Clyde Drexler people still thought he was the best shooting guard in the league, and obviously Jordan had passed him up a while ago. But like these were like all debates that like people had that like the fans for the other teams thought. My number 9 team is actually the 91-92 Blazers.
Okay.
Again, I'm not saying that this was a bad team. I mean, obviously they made the finals. They had Clyde Drexler, who was a Hall of Famer. I mean, one of the best shooting guards of all time. Incredibly athletic player, solid on both ends of the floor. But I think it's kind of like after that, I mean, Terry Porter was a really solid player. Jerome Kersey, Cliff Robinson. These are guys that the Blazers fans, I think they got like numbers retired, stuff like that. I mean, these are like some of the best players in their franchise's history. If you gave these guys their own team, like they weren't doing nothing. Like if you gave James Worthy his own team, I mean, that team's at least making the playoffs, right? I feel like this team was kind of like the Suns team, how there was one player who was definitely better than everybody else with Charles Barkley. But I think Charles Barkley in that year, I tried to use like historical context as well. Charles Barkley did like win MVP that year, and he was like the most dominant player in the regular season, and as Jordan said, and I took that personally. I mean, Clyde Drexler obviously was incredible, but he was the guy who was supposed to be the Jordan stopper, and that just clearly didn't happen. I mean, there's not too much to say I mean, there's like a couple names that are like recognizable to the average basketball fan, you know what I mean? Yeah. They had 6 guys in the regular season that averaged in double figures. This wasn't an incredible team, like 57 wins in the regular season. I mean, that's good. I mean, but dudes are winning 60 all the time.
Right. No, I totally agree.
Like the Lakers might have won 60 this year in the shortened season. I honestly don't remember. Maybe not. Yeah, there was only like 72 or 74 games or something. Maybe they didn't. But I mean, dudes are winning 60 all the time. This team didn't have to make a finals. Like they did, so credit to them. But they had no shot.
I am going to finally here enters the 2019-2020 Miami Heat.
Just before you start, I just want to say something. You know, the NBA season was like underway a year ago today. That's like wild.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Like I saw like a year ago today was like the Knicks' first win when Bobby Portis had like 28 or something and like 2 daggers. And
you guys won on opening night?
Nope, we did not. But we won like our 4th game or something.
I was gonna say that doesn't mean that the NBA started last year.
No, I'm saying like by this. I'm just saying like by this time like it was already started, and that's like kind of wild.
Oh. I thought you meant like tonight was opening night, and then you were like, yeah, I know because the Knicks won. And I was like, well, that doesn't mean that they won. That doesn't mean it was opening night, man. It could have been like 3 weeks down the line.
It just goes to show like how long the season was. How long? I mean, they had a 4-month break in the middle, but how long these teams were playing. All right, sorry, continue.
My 8 spot goes to the Miami Heat. I thought this team obviously was a Cinderella story. They beat teams that were a lot better than them, I'll be honest. They were led by Jimmy Butler, of course, and his numbers aren't great. And I don't think that's why you talk about Jimmy Butler. You talk about Jimmy Butler because he's a winner. Yeah. He's got that dog mentality. He brought a bunch of rookies, Tyler Hero, Division III player, Duncan Robinson, who could shoot the lights out. They had 8 dudes on this team averaging double digits in the regular season. We go down to the playoff, we're getting same thing, 6, 7 guys averaging double figures. Not to mention that they had an older, but a much experienced Andre Iguodala. They still had Jay Crowder, who started lighting it up.
I forgot. I didn't have the roster pulled up. Yeah, but like Crowder, Iguodala.
This is a really good team. Yeah,
they had the right vets there. It's just I think that the reason that they ultimately didn't win is that they didn't have the firepower to hang with them.
Right. If you really look at the bench lineup, I mean, they had Tyler Hero coming off the bench court in 16 points. All 5 starters averaged double figures. Rowan Bams 10 rebounds, Goron's almost 5 assists, and then you have Jimmy 22, 6.5, and 6 with 2 steals. I think this was a great team. This was a good matchup for the Lakers because they're not a great 3-point defending team. I mean, yeah, you have Danny Green, who's slow, KCP, who's slow. They just really couldn't get up to the arc. I think that's what the problem with Milwaukee was. But the Lakers kind of showed some of the same issues. I think it was just kind of, once they got to the finals, they ramped it up. You know, they knew that they had it in the bag once they saw this Heat team. And not necessarily fair to the Heat, but it's true. It's how it is.
Yeah.
Jimmy Butler was on a pretty historic stretch. I thought that was pretty impressive. He deserves some kind of award. I don't really know what you can give that guy.
Yeah, exactly. I like if they had like a not like a Finals MVP, but if they gave out like a bubble playoff MVP for the whole playoffs, I feel like Jimmy Butler's got to win that.
Yeah, they just hit their stride at the right time.
Either him or Jamal Murray.
An impressive team. Yeah, Jamal Murray too. I think this was a really tough team to beat, and I know because I watched every single game we played against them.
Obviously.
They were tough. Duncan Robinson could pop off for 15 points in like a couple minutes. He's a human torch.
Yeah.
Really tough dude to play against.
I hope ultimately Jimmy Butler does get in the Hall of Fame, because if they just like look at his stats, did he average 20? He averaged like 22 points, right? Like some kid, right? Say some like 13-year-old kid, like 20 years from now, is looking and they're like, Jimmy Butler was their best player. He averaged 22 points. He's trash. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
right.
Only 34.9% from the arc in the playoffs. He couldn't shoot. He's trash. Like, nah, like Jimmy, like
Yeah.
When it's all said and done, like this was one of the all-time Cinderella playoff runs. One of the all-time, I'm gonna let my game do the talking runs out of Jimmy Butler.
It's similar to the 8 seed New York Knicks.
Yes, exactly.
I think if I could be so bold as to say that. I mean, these guys weren't the 8 seed, but I wasn't worried about them at all. And I don't think Milwaukee was either. And look what happened. Giannis had to fake an injury just to save some face. But anyway, Heat go with my 8 spot. That's my final word.
You see, my 8 is actually the I feel like the drop off between 8 and 9 was a lot. I feel like you're going to have this team a lot higher up. And I think 8 through 1, I was actually really, really torn between 8 and 7. So with 8, I went with the 95-96 Sonics.
Okay.
I don't know. The reason why, I was looking at it, I was like, all right, Gary Payton and Shawn Kemp, right? And I was just like looking between that. I was like, all right, Gary Payton and Shawn Kemp, Russell Westbrook, and Kevin Durant. I was like, all right, that Thunder team didn't win the finals literally just because they were too young and they were like a year or two too early. And I was like, but at the same time, that Kevin Durant was probably, I would say, still a better player than Shawn Kemp. That Russell Westbrook definitely wasn't a better player than Gary Payton at that point. Kevin Durant, I'm pretty sure, won the scoring title. Kevin Durant was probably a top 3 to 5 player in the NBA at that point, even though he was 22, 23 years old. And I just think about all the potential that team had. Like, I feel really bad, like, putting the Sonics at 8. It kind of makes me sound like I think they sucked, but they really, really didn't. I'm not going to say they revolutionized the game, but they were, like, incredibly athletic. I mean, they were a team that lived on the fast break. I mean, Gary Payton was one of the best defensive players of all time, right? I mean, Shawn Kemp is one of the highest flyers of all time. I mean, they had Detlef Schrempf, who was a little bit older, but he was still capable. They had Hersey Hawkins. They had a little older Sam Perkins. They had, like, Nate McMillan, Dave Wingate, young Eric Snow. Like, they had guys on this team, recognizable names, right? Mm-hmm. Recognizable names. Look back to, like, what I said about the Heat. Like, this team didn't have the firepower. Like, I feel terrible because, I mean, they went up against the 96 Bulls, who were arguably the greatest team of all time. They stood no chance. Right. They didn't have one player that was as good as Scottie Pippen. So if we're ranking the players in that series, I mean, a lot of these series, it'll be 1 Jordan, 2 Pippen. Actually, maybe not. But this one, right? It was 1 Jordan, 2 Pippen. Then we're going 3-4 as
Glove and Kemp.
And then after that, I mean, there's Rodman, and then from there on, I don't know.
And I'd even be willing to what year was this? 95, 96? I'd even make a case for Dennis Rodman.
No, exactly. Like you definitely could. I think Rodman was the better. I think at this year, I mean, I feel like Shawn Kemp was the man. I think that, like, if you gave him his own team or Rodman his own team, that Kemp would be better.
Yeah, but there's a case to be made, I think.
Exactly. I was, again, great team. It just, like, wasn't a good matchup for them, but it's almost kind of the same argument. Like, that Thunder team had the firepower that Sonics team didn't have, and that's just what gave me the edge. So, I mean, I already ruined it. 7 was my 12th Thunder, the team that, if they didn't get broken up, I mean, probably would have won the finals that Golden State had won, and then some. How about you? Who was your 7?
I had 91-92 Portland.
Yeah, that's fair.
This finalized the first Jordan three-peat for me. And looking at it, I really didn't even mean to do it intentionally, but I had this team higher than the other two and higher than this most previous Heat team because they had Clyde the Glide. Dude was averaging 25. They had pretty deep, I don't want to say bench, but they had a pretty deep starting 5. is Danny Ainge. So this was a slightly younger Danny Ainge. But nonetheless, Danny Ainge got his ass kicked by Jordan again.
Danny Ainge is on
Poor
so many
bastard.
of these teams. I feel bad.
I thought this team was much better than the Suns teams we were talking about. Again, I'm thinking depth. I'm thinking Michael Jordan's out there. Who can we throw at him? Who can we throw at this guy to try to score points, to try to stop him? We got to do anything. We basically just got to stop the bleeding. I'm looking at this team: 26 from Clyde the Glide, 21 from Terry Porter. We have 16 from Jerome Kersey, 10 from Clifford Robinson and Danny Ainge, along with 5 rebounds, 4 assists here and there. And then you have Clyde the Glide doing 26, 7, and 7 with a block and a steal and a half. I mean, this guy was a force to stop. And yeah, Scottie Pippen was covering this dude, sure. But this was Clyde when he was in his prime. And I think that was a force to be reckoned with in itself. So I put them at my 7th worst team. I guess we're approaching the territory now where we have to call it the 7th best team, the 6th best team, but I definitely had them at number 7. Pretty much 6. Not much to say about it. It's the 95-96 Seattle team.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they were, if I have to look at this in a scale 1 through 10, I would have to say that they are a little worse than average. Just as far as the competition ahead. You do have the glove, you do have Detlef Schrempf, Sean Kemp, and everything you said before. I just had them a little higher than you did because I think that seeing The Last Dance, I'm sure if you haven't seen it, you definitely should. If you have seen it, you know what I'm talking about. Gary Payton just wouldn't be guarding Mike for some reason.
George Karl, right? Didn't George Karl wanted somebody else on him, and then finally, I think it was like Game 5 when they were facing elimination. Gary Payton was like, "George, I'm gonna guard him," and he's like, "Okay." And then they actually won that game, and then Game 6.
It's funny, man. Just like it's funny how sometimes coaches will just be like that, just make a crazy decision. Like didn't they pull that pitcher from the Rays in the bottom of the 6th yesterday, and they basically struck out half of the batters.
Yeah, no, Blake Snell was dealing the Dodgers were not touching him. It didn't matter. Righties, lefties, nobody was touching him. And then he had one guy on base who was like the backup catcher. Got like a lucky single. I mean, it was like a legitimate single. It wasn't like a bloop or anything. Like he hit the ball hard to center field and it dropped in. And then they're like, all right, let's bring in Nick Anderson. Now Nick Anderson was one of the best relief pitchers in the league this year, but the Dodgers saw him like he was not pitching as good as usual. And then obviously I scored 2 runs that inning and then won the World Series. And I feel like I think that's the perfect analogy for how could you have somebody who's one of the best defensive guards of all time. I mean, smaller than Michael Jordan, but still would have given it hell, and really did in Game 5.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. It would have been definitely would have been a different series had Glove guarded Michael, but he didn't. But I can't fault this team for that or coaching, and maybe George Karl had something else in mind. But really, 20 from Gary, 20 from Sean Kemp, and 16 from Detlef is just it's pretty brutal. That's a pretty brutal 3-headed monster. So I had them at my 6th slot.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. All right, my 6th, I'm going to be honest, this is kind of coming out of left field a little bit.
Okay, that's what I'm here for.
I don't know. I kept shuffling things around. I ranked the Jordan teams first, and I ranked the LeBron teams separately, and then I put them together, and I actually have the 98 Jazz.
Okay.
And you see, here's the reason why. I think the Jazz, I think that was one of the best teams from the 1990s. I mean, obviously they have 2 of the best players of all time. I mean, Stockton is one of the best point guards in the game's history. I mean, he's top 20 player, and I think really the same with Karl Malone. I mean, one of the best. I mean, we're not fans of Karl Malone on this show for non-basketball reasons, but if we're just talking about,
just if I can add to that, and not even talking about, you just seen all the videos that have come out since after The Last Dance, and he's like, no, that's not how it was. He's just like a crotchety old dude.
Oh my God,
I mean?
Yeah, stop.
He's just so grumpy that Michael just torched him.
Exactly. And
that's not a good dude.
I'll be honest, pretty happy that he did not win a finals with the Lakers when he tried to form a little washed up super team.
That was him and Gary Payton.
Yeah, it was. Gary did get his ring though with the Heat.
It's like anybody that got torched by Michael.
It was like, all right, we're gonna join Kobe, the guy. We're gonna say he's better than him, right? When we win this finals, that's actually kind of funny.
And I don't even remember who won that.
What
year was that? Do you remember?
I want to say that was that game. That was that game we had in the PlayStation, right? Was that or was that the year
so
after
what was that
we played?
2000.
It was like 03, 04 probably.
Yeah. So who would have won that year, dude?
Pistons, maybe?
Probably a Spurs team.
Yeah, maybe the Spurs. No, probably the Spurs.
No, I think you're right. I think it was the Pistons.
Yeah, wait, they lost in the finals in 5 to the Pistons, dude. I'm sorry that we're getting off track here, but look at this team, dude. They still had Shaq. Dude. Kobe Bryant, Shaq, Gary Payton, Karl Malone. There's 4 Hall of Famers right there. I mean, after that, you still got Rick Fox. You still have Derek Fisher. You still have Horace Grant. That's another. Oh my God, dude. Brian Russell. This whole team was.
Wow.
This whole team was. All right, we hate Michael Jordan. Let's get this done.
Yeah, like enough is enough.
And they lost.
They lost.
They sold their soul and lost.
Wow. They lost to Rasheed Wallace and Chauncey Billups.
Yeah.
Rip Hamilton. They lost to a dude in a mask and Chauncey Billups. That's so
They lost to Darko.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's wild. I'm really glad that we took a little detour
took that
on the
little
show
trip.
today.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to this Jazz roster. I like in historical context, I remember like watching The Last Dance. They were like, "All right, we're winning this year. This is our year." Like the Utah fans. I mean, they hated Jordan. They hated the Bulls. Like they thought this was their year. But I'm looking at it. John Stockton was 35 years old. I mean, I feel like John Stockton was kind of like Steve Nash. That's like I grew up watching Steve Nash. I feel like that's the comparison. Like Steve Nash wasn't always the greatest scorer, but like obviously we knew he was one of the best players in the league and one of the best point guards of all time, right? I feel like that's kind of like Stockton. I mean, but he only averaged 12 points per game in the regular season, 8 assists. He was 35 years old, right? Jeff Hornacek was 34. He still shot 44% from 3. Stockton still shot 42. So I mean, it's not like they were bad. If we're just looking at points per game, Karl Malone was still 27 and 10, but I mean, and he was 34. And Brian Russell, who was a pretty good player as well. I mean, good defender. I mean, but even he was under double figures in the finals and the regular season. And that was like their number 4 option. I just looked at this team and they kind of didn't. It was 2 guys. And then Hornacek was like, he was a fine number 3. I don't know if you would call it a big 3, but like he was their number 3 option. And this team was just worse than it was the year before, if we're going to be completely honest. And I would say, I mean, this team didn't drop off a cliff. They still took them to, what was it, 6 games? Just like they did the year before. But if I'm just looking at it, like this was a much worse team in 90s than it was in 97. Like if they wanted to, I think their best shot was probably in 97 when they when the pizza delivery guy poisoned Jordan.
Yeah.
If we're being
right.
honest.
Yeah. They should have got it done then.
Yeah.
But they couldn't, and then they came back a year later. Much worse.
The Bulls team was definitely worse too. I mean, Scottie Pippen, like he had the ankle, like he missed a couple games. Like he was a decoy. Game 6. I mean, Jordan was a year older, but also like a year wiser. So I mean, take that as you will. I don't know. I just think I have the 97 and the 98 Jazz teams. I know that it was just 1 year later, but I have both of them ranked pretty far apart.
All right, now is probably a better time than any to stop and take a little break. We'll hear again from our sponsor of the week, Moobly Crew. So let's hear a little bit from them, huh?
Let's.
Moobly Crew, Moobly Crew, Moobly Crew, Moobly Crew, Moobly Crew.
We love music.
All right, thanks for listening. That was a Moobly Crew. Thank you for sponsoring this week's episode. And now let's get back into it. Let's talk about our top 10.
Let me just say real quick, at my 5, I had the 97-98 Jazz.
Gotcha.
I totally agree with everything you're saying, and it's funny, I do have the 97 higher and not much higher, but same thing you're saying, just a year later,
Just
a
every
bit
single
worse.
one of those players, like their top 4 players, Malone, Hornacek, Stockton, and Brian Russell. I mean, all of those guys were better in 97.
No, absolutely. So I agree. I did have them 1 higher than you, but trust me, if I could have put them lower,
So 5, I feel like we're probably not going to talk about the Jazz any more than we did, at least 98 Jazz. 5, I had the 93 Suns. I feel like they're kind of in the same boat as the Jazz. Like, again, like it was kind of weird putting these teams, like especially the Suns, putting them behind the 2012 Thunder. But like I have to remember that like this Thunder team just wasn't ready.
When did you have the Thunder
I
again?
had the Thunder at 7.
Okay, yeah, that was a shocker.
You see, that's the thing is I was really, really trying to remember because, I mean, I still remember, I would say anything this past decade that happened in the NBA. I mean, I feel like I remember pretty vividly. And then everything before that, like I remember, but I would say everything this past decade, and I just remember that, like that Thunder team, they won game 1, right? They looked incredible. And then the whole rest of the series, they just looked completely overmatched. And it just wasn't their fault. I mean, that was really LeBron James' prime. I would say 2012, 2013 was the best LeBron that we saw, and he was
Right.
so hungry to win a finals, dude. After they lost in 2011 to Dallas, the slander was just in an all-time high, and he knew. I would say just like Clayton Kershaw knew that he needed to win a World Series, and he won one last night, and I feel like he was relieved, and then eventually he was like, damn, I'm a champion, and then was like overcome with joy. I feel like that was kind of LeBron in 2012. I just thought that 2012 Thunder team wasn't ready yet. The 93 Suns, I feel like was kind of the opposite. Like that was supposed to be their moment. Like I remember in the doc, right, they're talking about like they legitimately thought this was their year. In the regular season, I know you said that this team wasn't deep because you were looking at the playoff stats, and I think that's pretty fair. But I tried to look at both when I did this, and I mean they had 7 guys that averaged 11 points a game or more. Charles Barkley won the MVP this year, completely dominant. I mean, averaged 25 and 12, and like this was a time where big man play was really important. I mean, Dan Marley was supposed to be the guy to guard Jordan. Again, nobody could. I mean, they had Kevin Johnson, Richard Dumas, a young Cedric Ceballos. I mean, an older Danny Ainge. Like they had this team was, and fun fact, they had 34-year-old Kurt Rambis who played in 5 games. I don't know if he played in the finals. I'm pretty sure he didn't.
That's funny.
I don't know. Kurt Rambis is just always funny. He just is.
Yes, I'd agree with that statement.
I thought just trying to get the historical context, like this team really, really was supposed to be good. And like when people talk about players from the 90s that didn't get title who people think deserved one, I mean, obviously there's Stockton Malone, there's Patrick Ewing, and there's Charles Barkley. This was supposed to be his year. Like he thought that was going to be his year. And, I mean, he's still bitter to this day. Like, you saw how pissed he was after they lost. And, I mean, this is a team that won 62 games. I feel like once you win 60, I'm like, all right, that's a legitimate team. Regular season obviously does not matter for everything, and we know that. I don't know. I thought I have them at 5, but, I mean, I feel like there's not necessarily wrong answers. Like, if you're going to tell me the 2012 Thunder is better than this Suns team because look at they had 3 guys who ended up winning MVP. They had Ibaka, who was one of the best defensive players in the league as well. Like, look at this, what these guys, the potential they had. I'll be like, I understand that. I completely respect that.
No, I mean, and I understand that, and I don't really fault you for putting them that high. I mean, I get what you're saying. I do. Regular season success definitely has to play a part of it, but I just thought that overall, when I look at the best teams, if I'm looking at roster, I'm looking at playoff numbers, I am looking at the regular season. You know, that doesn't fall by the wayside, but it definitely is a part of my decision making. However, I just looked at that team and thought, nah. You know, I could name about probably 5 to 10 teams that would beat them now. And again, as you were saying before, maybe that's because I didn't watch that. Maybe those dudes clicked. You know, maybe they just knew they had a great system, they had a great coach. Maybe they knew absolutely what the other person was going to do. But say that even the Lakers team today would just thrash that team. But that's just me.
Number 4, I feel like this is when we get down to the nitty gritty. I really went back and forth I really, really went back and forth between, I had them at one point at 3, I had them at one point at 2. I have the 2013 Spurs, the 2012-13 Spurs. Honestly, like this team, like if this team is number 2 on your list, I completely respect it. I mean, they had their big 3. They had Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, and obviously Tim Duncan, who I think is probably one of the best 5 players of all time. And they also had Kawhi Leonard. They also had, I believe it was second year Kawhi Leonard.
21.
I think the team, even though the year after Tim Duncan was a year older, Tony was a year older, Manu was a year older, but Kawhi was a year older, and he was so much better. I think if we had to rank all the teams they played against, the 14 Spurs, I mean, they trounced the Heat. And the Heat might have even been favored in that series. But this Spurs team, I mean, they almost won in 6 games. They really almost did if it wasn't for Ray Allen, one of the clutchest shots in NBA history.
The shot.
And then the shot. And Chris Bosh, who was historically a terrible rebounder in the finals, had that rebound and kicked it out to him. I think, like, at this point, their best player was Tony Parker, and I would say probably in 14 as well. Tim Duncan was still really good. He was still making the All-Star team every year. And then Manu was kind of a little bit on the downside. It's almost weird, like, how this team was so good to begin with and how they almost beat the LeBron Wade Heat. I don't know, like, I really went back and forth. But I just thought about the fact that Tim Duncan was a little bit older. I would say like Magic Johnson was a little bit older, as Stockton and Malone were a little bit older. Tony Parker was like just getting in his prime, but I think that the thing that held me back, like if this was prime Kawhi Leonard, if this was even 2014 Kawhi Leonard, this team's absolutely locked in it too. I just think it was just like a weird in between time for all of these players, and I
could agree, and I think that's why they lost.
And, like, I almost say, like, just the fact how the Heat kept getting offensive rebounds and then they completely wilted in the overtime of Game 6 and then Game 7. I don't know. You could have the Spurs team at 2. You could have the Spurs team 3, 4, like, wherever. I feel like it was a really, really weird in-between time. I keep saying that.
No,
That's
I know
just
what
the
you mean.
one
It was
thing
an
that,
old Tim Duncan. You know, it was a young Kawhi.
And you remember Denny Green this was, like, his breakout series, I believe. I think in this series, he set the record for most threes in the finals that obviously would get broke 25 times over by any Warriors player, but, you know.
He was actually the only person in his prime. I mean, he was 25, but even Manu was old, 35, Tim Duncan 36. And I hear what you're saying. I hear your concern.
Who did you have before?
So my fourth, and I'm just sick of talking about them, but it's the 97 Jazz.
Yeah.
I'm sick of talking about the Jazz, but I will say that they were my fourth. This was a pretty dominant team, 26 and 12 from Karl Malone, and this was a much better series from Stockton, 16 and 10. You have 14 from Jeff Hornacek. I thought this was a much better team than they were the next year. So that was my fourth team, 97 Jazz. I'll just go with my third team then, because I'm not really talking about the Jazz, and that's the 2011-2012 OKC Thunder.
Interesting.
Maybe they weren't in their prime. KD being 23, Russell same thing, 23, James Harden 22, even Serge Ibaka was 22 here.
Yeah.
Like,
dude, it's
crazy.
Like, all they literally had to do was either go to them and be like, all right, guys, this could be, like, the greatest team of all time. All sign extensions, maybe take a little pay cut. Like, they definitely, I mean, the cap was weird back then, and it wasn't really as much as it was. And there were weird clauses with, like, how much you were able to give players coming off whatever contracts. But all they had to do was not trade James Harden.
You know what's crazy is I saw somewhere with that where since the Thunder traded Harden, which I guess was this year, right, 2012, every single team in the league has missed the playoffs except for the Rock. Every single team.
Really?
Has missed the playoffs at least once.
The Thunder missed the playoffs?
Yeah.
Oh my God. There was that. Yeah, wait. That was when they still had Russ and KD and, like, no, Russ had the torn meniscus or MCL, and then he came back through the season halfway, and then literally, like, the game he came back or something, KD broke his foot, and then it was all Russ, and they just missed out, I think, to the Pelicans. Right.
Isn't that an insane stat?
Like, that's wild. I'm, like, trying to think of other teams. You guys must have missed the playoffs, like, once or twice after the KG Paul Pierce trade, I'm assuming.
Yeah, we definitely did. I think it might have even been, once or twice.
Yeah,
I can't
it, like,
really
almost
recall,
doesn't seem like it, because that was the most seamless just comeback into relevancy.
I guess if you want to call it a rebuild,
Yeah. And
there were a couple of years where we had the Gerald Wallace, Jeff Green, Brandon Bass, Courtney Lee kind of lineup. Yeah, we definitely missed the playoffs, but I thought that was incredible. And maybe it's a coincidence.
Dude, even the Heat, I think they missed it last year. No, I know they missed it
last
year. I think one other time.
Think about
LeBron
it. I mean, obviously, the bad teams like the Hornets or teams like that are obviously going to miss. Like Spurs was the last domino to fall.
Yeah, and the Warriors. That's what the Warriors too.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely.
Oh,
but I just thought that was a crazy stat, isn't that? Sometimes you find those cool ones. Yeah. But anyway, back to it. Yeah, I thought that this 2012 team was definitely the third best team. It's a very young core, but still, if you look at the playoff totals, KD was still averaging 28, and Russ still had 23 with 16 off the bench from Harden. That's pretty good. I think those are really good numbers. Their problem was rebounding. I mean, even the starting center really only averaged 6 rebounds.
Was their starting center Perk? Was it Perk? Or,
yeah. I believe it was Perk.
Yeah. I don't have the team up right now.
Yeah, no,
that team definitely had Derek Fisher too, I think.
Yes, Derek Fisher was the first off the bench, or second off the bench, obviously.
I think they had Eric Maynard. I'm just trying to think of guys off the top of my head. Who started
Nazir Muhammad, Nick Collison,
Nick Collison. Yeah, Cephalosha. That was who started at 2 guard.
I thought that this team, I mean, they had a lot of potential, but I thought the tough team to beat, this was a tough team to match up against. I mean, like as you said before, KD was, he was top 5 player in the league at this point. Just absolutely on a tear. 57% from 2. He was hitting, 37 from 3. This is just in the playoffs. He was torching. 28 points and 7.5 boards is a lot. When you add 4 assists, a steal and a half, 1.2 blocks. pretty impressive. That's my third best team.
Correct me if I'm wrong. It was literally right after this series. It was the summer after this series they traded James Harden. Or it might have even been like the beginning of like September. Dude, how can you do that? Like I think Sam Presti. I'm not gonna use the G word, genius. Presti, incredible dude. He drafted Kevin Durant second overall. I'm not going to really say anything about that. He should have gone first. I think that's obvious. He drafted James Harden a little bit earlier than people had expected. Like, nobody expected him to turn into the player he was. Russell Westbrook was great at UCLA with Kevin Love. And then even Serge Ibaka, I don't think anybody was too high on Serge Ibaka, right? So he drafts this incredible, like one of the best 3 or 4 year stretch of drafting, correct?
Right.
And he lets one guy go. And eventually he lets them all go. And that team won no finals. And they even get Paul George in there. They even get Carmelo in there. And that team won no finals. I'm sure ownership was like, no, we can't pay Harden and like trade him. Dude, after that series, I don't get how you break that team up, dude. You keep them together for at least 1 year, right?
Right.
You have to. And you have to be like, all right, let's get a finals. And then we can start moving guys around and worrying about money. We'll just refer to them as the big four, right? We'll just throw Ibaka in there just for
Yeah.
Ibaka was a legitimate player. Like he was a guy, great defensive player, and eventually became a pretty solid offensive player as well. You keep those four, whatever you pay those four, whatever you want. I'm sure that you could fit 4 salaries under the salary cap, and then literally pay everybody else minimums, right? And then you get your mid-level exception every year, so you could split that, so pay 2 guys a little more than the minimum, and then you get draft picks, right? You just field a team of those 4 and bums, and you would have won at least 2 finals. My number 3, I finally had the 91 Lakers. I tried to put this, and you see, here's the reason why. I tried to put this in like historical context, and the Lakers were kind of like a half a dynasty, you know what I mean?
Right.
Them and the Celtics went back and forth. I don't know how many. I'm just going to look at Magic Johnson. How many finals did he win?
5. He won 5.
He won 3 finals MVPs. So he probably, I'm just going to have to take your word for it. I don't know why I can't find NBA champion on here.
5-time NBA champion, 1980, 82, 85. Because I remember, and then 87 and 88.
Right. So, this was definitely 3 years removed from their last title. But this was a dynasty, right? And they have Magic Johnson, another player, arguably one of the top 5 players of all time. He was only 31 years old. I know after that he didn't play for 4 years because of the virus, because of HIV. Sorry, I'm just thinking. Now I think of the virus, I think of Corona. He didn't play for 4 years because of HIV, retired. But anyway, Magic Johnson was still averaging 19 points, 12 assists. It was like this series was like the passing of the torch, right? And it was almost kind of like when they beat the Pistons too, right? They swept them, and it was almost kind of like the passing of the torch from that team to the Jordan teams. And it's like the Warriors last year. The Dodgers didn't really have a dynasty because this was their first win, but they won 8 divisions. You know what I mean? It's like
my problem with that is
I'm just trying to use historical context. Like I think a lot of people probably at the time probably thought, damn, this is a tough matchup. You know what I mean? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. My problem with that is just that dynasty's over. I don't think people would call the Patriots right now still a proponent of that dynasty. Tom Brady's gone.
No,
right?
Exactly.
We have Cam Newton, and you see in the news Gilmore might get traded.
Oh my God, are you serious?
Yeah, I guess he put his house up for sale.
Oh my
and everything.
God, dude, Gilmore's the best cornerback in football.
Oh yeah, he absolutely is. But dynasty can, and I think when Kareem left, and I think even though Magic he wasn't the better player, but when Kareem left, that was the end of the dynasty, and that's why I had him so low. This was just a beat down Lakers team.
No, I completely get that. I feel like if Kareem is on this team, like you could make the argument, say like Jordan made an early finals, you know what I mean? Like say like he did single-handedly beat the Pistons one year and made the finals against the Lakers. Like this team, like you could have an argument. I don't think you could have an argument for number 1, but I think it definitely would have been number 2. And if you had,
I think they would have lost
this team with Magic Johnson and Kareem, I don't think that they would have had an answer. You never know, but those Lakers teams are incredible, and that's kind of. I try to put it in historical context. They still have Magic Johnson. Arguably the best point guard of all time. You still had James Worthy, right, Hall of Famer. You had a young Vlade Divac, who was an up-and-coming player, right? And then it was basically a lot of role players after that. There was, like, Byron Scott, like Sam Perkins before he was, like, washed. AC Green, who they called, like, the ultimate role player there. Michael Thompson. They had Larry Giroux as well. Definitely have to completely agree, like, nowhere near as good as the other Lakers teams. I tried to do as best as I could to use historical context and, like, how people viewed this team back then, and I feel like people still thought that this was a great Lakers team until Jordan went in there and whooped them.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know, it's like hard for me to put this team above that Spurs team. I don't know. I didn't want to change anything. Like, after you had the Lakers as the worst one, I was like, damn, should I switch some of these up? Am I gonna look like a dumbass now? But
No, and
I just wanted to leave everything because I felt like this was a nice, fun exercise we could talk about. And your three, you said, was that
definitely agree.
Thunder one?
My 3 was that Thunder one. I'll
Right.
give you my 2 right now.
Go ahead.
Spoiler alert, it is the Spurs.
Yeah.
I think that even though that's an old team, they still gave them hell. You know, I think it went all the way to 7.
Yeah.
Right? Ray Allen, obviously the shot and everything like that. It was an incredible series. And again, it had Kawhi Leonard, who would steal another title from, no, I guess not from LeBron, but he would get another title eventually. And, he's definitely one of the best players in basketball. But yeah, just to put it pretty simply, I just think that this was just a really good team, really, really well coached.
Yeah.
Pretty deep. Everybody knew their role. I think it was a really good hustle team. This is definitely the second best team for me, at least in my opinion. And yeah, that was
my number 2 team. I'm gonna have the '97 Jazz. We talked about them a little bit earlier. I mean, Stockton Malone, like all these teams that we have on here, right? Like the Blazers, they had Clyde Drexler. I mean, Hall of Famer, like really, really good player. You had like Charles Barkley, like Hall of Famer, really, really good player. Like some of these guys, like arguably like top 20, top 25 players of all time, right? And they had 2 of them. And that's like almost kind of why I feel bad about having the '98 Jazz so far down. But in '97, like they were still, I believe Carmelo won MVP in '97. Could be wrong. He won MVP one of those years, though. Yes, I was right. All right, so he did win. He did win MVP in 1997. I don't know. I just had to. I've said historical context 65 million times during this podcast today. I mean, he was MVP again. Jordan always liked to take that personally when he didn't win an MVP. We saw that happen. This team this was their chance in '97. The Bulls were better in '97 than they were in '98. The Bulls, this was actually the year that they had Robert Parrish. This was the year they had Robert Parrish. He was 43 years old. I mean, this Jazz team, this was the best one they had. I mean, Stockton hadn't really fallen off yet. Jeff Hornacek was still Jeff Hornacek. I mean, about as dependable of a shooter as you could get. And Brian Russell, the guy who is in just about every Michael Jordan finals highlight, he was a lot better of a player this year than he was that year as well. And I just think that they had having 2 guys that are probably top 20 players of all time. I feel like that has to put them at number 2, because they were because these guys were still basically in their prime, if not like I would say like the tail end of their prime. And that's just what had them at 2. And then now number 1, we could have a nice 2016 Warriors love fest.
Yeah, a little nice casual agreement for probably the first time on this list.
I believe so.
Incredible team, obviously, and who knows? First of all, this is definitely one of the greatest teams that's ever existed. I think honestly, their top 3, and in no particular order, I think it's this team, it's the Jordan team, and I think it's the KD Warriors team. I think those are 3 incredible teams.
I mean, the KD Warriors team is disgusting. Disgusting. It never should have happened, dude.
It really is. And I really like this Warriors team, man. I like them because they had a lot of grit. And it's not like Steph Curry was obviously just like really, really hitting his stride. Same
Yeah,
thing
this
with Klay
was
Thompson.
like at this time.
Draymond was
Remember,
great.
people were asking if Steph Curry was the best player in the league if he passed up LeBron, and then LeBron was kind of like, nah.
Nah. Yeah, he was like, nah. I mean, this was probably one of the greatest finals I've ever seen.
Yeah, this finals was
incredible.
incredible, dude.
This is a historic sports story. The 3-1, of course.
Yeah, but just like these two teams were at their peak. That was probably the best Cavs team too.
Yeah.
Let me pull up that roster. I mean, but
Yeah, I can tell you.
I mean, the Warriors. I mean, they did almost lose to the Kevin Durant Thunder. That was the most wild. That season was wild. Those playoffs.
They
were
came
wild.
back 3-1.
Dude, and the thing is, like, that Warriors team, like, people actually rooted for them. Like, people didn't hate them yet.
Oh, I definitely rooted for them.
Yeah.
And I don't root against the Warriors because like you and I had a discussion the other day, and maybe this could be in a future pod or something. But Steph Curry is easily one of my favorite players.
Oh, absolutely.
I
wanted
really
Steph
have
Curry.
always liked him.
Yeah, I wanted Stephen Curry coming out of Davidson. I forget if I've said this on the podcast before, but there was a pretty big faction of Knicks fans that were like, "All right, so we got to get rid of one. We got to get rid of Eddie Curry, and we got to draft Stephen Curry, right?" The Knicks held on to Eddie Curry for another year and a half, and then unfortunately missed Stephen Curry. Didn't trade up or anything like that. We missed him by one pick and drafted Jordan Hill. So
How did that work out?
Jordan Hill does not play anymore, and Stephen Curry is when he retires could end up being the greatest point guard in NBA history. Anyway, we look at this team, right? This was, I wouldn't say that this probably wasn't peak LeBron. Peak LeBron was probably those 2 Heat years. But this is this is prime LeBron, but not peak LeBron. If that makes sense.
No, I would agree.
Kyrie Irving was 23 years old. He was still coming into his own, but I mean, at this point, I mean, that's an like he was already probably a couple-time All-Star. And then Kevin Love, I mean, they had him the year before too, but I mean, Kyrie and Kevin Love got hurt. Right. So they had all 3 of them. And Kevin Love, like 2 years before, was like a top 10 player in the NBA. He was. His fit was kind of weird with the Cavs. They kind of turned him into a spot-up shooter, especially in the Tyronn Lue offense. They had a lot of just broken plays, a lot of Kyrie and LeBron isolation. I mean, but Kevin Love was still an incredibly talented player. And this was like the JR resurgence season.
Yeah, it was a great team. Don't get me wrong. It's crazy because Harrison Barnes was the starting small forward. He averaged 9 points a game, and Draymond Green really stepped it up. 15 points, 10 rebounds, 6 assists, a steal and a half, almost 2 blocks. I mean, he just had playing out of his mind.
Yeah,
so when
Draymond,
you look at these averages, you just see
if they won that NBA Finals, right? Say the Warriors won in Game 7, unless Steph Curry went off for 40 or Klay went off for 40. I mean, Draymond Green was probably going to win that MVP. And
he probably would have deserved it.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Because, I mean, remember, he did infamously get suspended. I think it was, and in like a little altercation with LeBron, he did get suspended. But
they kicked him in the testes, didn't he?
The testes, yes.
Yeah.
But the
Just
game
like
he
he
didn't
did
play,
Steven Adams.
they got destroyed. Yeah, he should have gotten suspended. Really, that's what made the whole playoffs wild, dude. He should have gotten suspended for the Steven Adams one. They were like, nah, we'll let him play. We need this team in the finals for the ratings. But, like, if he didn't play, I don't know if they beat that Thunder team, but who knows? Because, like, this was when Draymond Green was a legitimate, really good player. And then...
And who knows, dude, honestly, maybe next year we see the same kind of Warriors thing. Just, like, depth, 3 good players, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about the Warriors later on in the show. But, yeah, I mean, this team was insane. Like, Harrison Barnes, I remember Harrison Barnes, it was the game Draymond was suspended for Game 6. And I think Harrison Barnes had 0 points. And everyone was like, all right, Harrison Barnes is the big X factor tonight. And he just... He was like a weird...
He really never showed up.
He was a good player, but he never really became as good as as good as he hoped, and then he went to Dallas to be like the guy, and he averaged a cool like 18 points there. He was like fine. But
Where's he
Harrison
on the
Barnes,
Kings now?
yeah, I think he's on the Kings. He's like, I don't know how his averages were. I think this past year he's probably doing like 14 a game. He's like
Yeah, it
fine.
just doesn't matter now.
I don't know. But I mean,
Nobody has dropped from the spotlight quicker than that guy.
Yeah. But I mean, even just in the context, he was 23 years old. But I mean, Harrison Barnes was even supposed to be like a decent player. Like he got his own team and averaged 18 points a game. So it's not like he was even a slouch as their number 4 option, even though he did behave like a slouch at times in that finals. Dude, and let's not forget they had Iguodala, right? Ultimate role player, won Finals MVP the year before. Sean Livingston, ultimate role player. They had Andrew Bogut, Festus Ezeli. Dude, remember Festus? He like signed somewhere else. Oh my God, Kevon Looney was 19 years old on this team. Did not know that.
No, that's funny. You know what's funny that I also didn't know as I have Basketball Reference up now is that Festus Ezeli went to Vanderbilt, and Ian Clark went to Belmont. So the two Nashville boys.
Oh,
they went to school here. I thought
Ian
it was funny.
Clark, dude.
Right. Yeah.
Ian Clark. I remember. We had a 2K association where you got Ian Clark in free agency or something like that, and he was your boy, dude. He killed me.
Just balled out.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Dude, this team was
I thought Patrick McCaw was on this team.
No, dude, if Patrick McCaw was on that team, they would have won.
Oh, you're right. Yes, he only won. That's right. That was his thing.
No, this team, like, literally 1 through 12 was... They even had more money, more problems, dude. Most space.
Yeah. Most space. This was... Yeah, I think... I'm glad that we both concluded that this was the best team, and I think this absolutely was.
If we
Even
had
like going to the Jordan teams, this has more firepower than anybody else.
It does, dude. It does. Like, I think ultimately if the 96 Bulls played this team, the 96 Bulls probably would have won. But if the 96 Bulls played the 2017 Warriors, I think that's the debate. I think those are the two. Those are the two teams.
Thrashed. They would have got thrashed.
How?
And maybe that's our next.
Oh my God.
Maybe that's our next.
Yeah. How did they literally just basically take this team and then replace Harrison Barnes with Kevin Durant?
I have no idea.
Wild.
Because they still had Iggy and Sean, didn't they?
They still had Iggy and Sean. Like maybe Barbosa and Rush. I'm just gonna hit next year on B. Rush.
No, not Barbosa. I know he retired.
I think he went to the Suns for like a quarter of a season and then was like, nah, I'm done. Oh, the year after they this team was so the year after obviously they brought in Kevin Durant. But besides that, they still had Iguodala. They still had Sean Livingston. They brought in Zaza. Remember, Zaza infamously injured. What's his name? They brought in JaVale McGee to replace Bogut and Festus. Those were the two. They brought in David West. Ooh, David West was fine. Ian Clark was still there. But they drafted McCaw, and then. And then they also had Matt Barnes. I forgot Matt Barnes.
Did KD win one title there or two?
Two,
and then Kawhi killed the three-peat, right?
Yeah. Okay. We gotta have. I mean, eventually in this show, probably before the season starts, we gotta have a discussion on that 2019 finals with that Kawhi and killing the three-peat and bringing the league, making it level again, but like how I hate saying how much value does the championship have because they won. I mean, Kawhi was incredible.
Right.
But like we just got to think like what would have happened if if Kevin Durant played, if Clay didn't get injured in the last game, like.
Yeah, we'll kick that around.
All right, you want to you want to
yeah,
start
give me a
talking
second. Let me take a break.
Mock draft? Yeah.
Let me go talk to Em real quick.
Yeah.
Let me take a break.
Yeah, I'm just gonna stop recording. Our top 10 teams that LeBron and Jordan beat in the finals.
Yeah. Definitely some great teams there, and the ones who actually have the greatest chance to do it again, I'd say, are the Warriors. And they had a down year, but next year, who knows, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they got the number 2 overall pick as well, and I think they got some second rounders in there, if I'm not
right.
mistaken. Or even if they don't have second rounders, they could buy second rounders. But I know they got a couple. So I mean, they'll be back. I think they'll be back. We'll see if they're gonna keep that pick, trade it. But yeah.
We can maybe do a little speculation on that next week. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
So I hope you enjoyed this one, and I mean, next week we'll be coming at you with some talk on what's to come in the NBA next season.
Absolutely.
And in the off season.
Thanks again, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next week.
All right, take care, guys. Be well.
Rock and Jouv. Rock and Jouv. Rock and Jouv. Rock and Jouv. Rock and Jouv.